Hey guys, how you doing? So welcome to the third video of chapter 11. We are going to look at reproductive strategies in this video. Okay, let's jump straight into it. Okay, reproductive strategies. Now, some of the advantages and disadvantages. Sexual reproduction, asexual reproduction has advantages compared to disadvantages. We've already gone through this in looking at asexual reproduction, but I'll kind of just highlight them and then look at it from a sexual reproduction perspective. Okay, so the advantages of sexual reproduction is that you've got genetic variation, right? By having genetic variation, it then allows you to adapt to an unstable or changing environment. Yeah, that means that your species as a whole or a whole population is more likely to survive and adapt to things like rapid changes in the environment, and you are more resistant to things like diseases. Okay, the disadvantages is that it is slower and it is a longer process. The main thing is that sexual reproduction is energetically expensive. It is a lot more expensive in terms of the amount of energy investment you have to put into than asexual reproduction, and it requires more energy to produce the sperm and the egg. And you also need two individuals, which means you need to find a mate, copulate, and etc., etc. Okay, and so these disadvantages means that organisms have to make use of strategies that will give them the most benefit for the amount of energy investment that they are putting into. And so different animals will deploy a different method depending on their environment, depending on their species, depending on their structure and things like that. Okay. But let's take a look at a few. So inside or outside, what that means is that, in sexual reproduction, you need to have fertilization. You need the sperm to meet the egg. However, it doesn't have to happen inside an organism. It can be inside or outside in an organism. Yeah? When it's inside an organism, we call that internal fertilization. Yeah? When it combines usually inside the female, although this doesn't always happen because, for example, in seahorses, internal fertilization can happen in the male, right? Mammals, birds, reptiles, and insects are kind of your main organisms that will use internal fertilization. There are some other animals that will do that as well, but these ones are the main ones, okay? When it happens outside of the body, we call that external fertilization, okay? And you can sort of see why in a second, why you would have different methods of whether it's internal or external depending on the species and their environment. But immediately you should already recognize that external really happens a lot in water, whereas internal kind of happens generally on land, right? Now that's not a hard and fast rule. There are many different kind of exceptions to the rule, but let's go with that. Okay, let's start with external fertilization, right? When it's outside, because it occurs outside the body, external fertilization usually produces a large amount of gametes. Yeah, there's a large amount of sperm or eggs involved in the fertilization process. And when I say large amount, I mean a very large amount. Yeah, because you're going for quantity over quality. Yeah, and what ends up happening is that some of those sperm and egg will fertilize, but most of them will actually die off, and it occurs usually in an aquatic environment. Okay, many coral reefs once a year will basically have a really big external fertilization event, usually sometime during kind of like the full moon, where all the corals will release all of their sperm and egg and reproduce sexually in the water column. It is so big you can see it, right? And so that picture there shows a coral reef reproducing or releasing the sperm and the egg in the water, and that is that kind of orange tinge in the water. Now, this sperm and egg are microscopic. Yeah, they're so small, but because there's so much of them, they become so thick and dense throughout that time of the year. Now, the corals tend to sink all at once. So basically, all the coral of that species will release, or on that reef will release all at once, because it increases the chance of fertilization, yeah, because the water column is so large and so big, and the oceans are so large that it needs to sort of happen at the same time, and biologists are still puzzled as to how sort of they can sync so well the time in which they release. Yeah, it's a very fascinating process, and it's awesome to sort of take a look at, and when you go scuba diving and things like that, just the whole water column is filled with these tiny little things. So it's a pretty amazing experience. I've seen videos, but it'd be pretty awesome to sort of go there and experience it one day, until of course you realize what you're actually swimming in, right? Anyway, so other things. So Fish are also known external fertilizers. This is a herring. He is the unfortunate victim of majority of predatory fish, and also we eat him as well. But herring are very important for the food chain. They kind of form your kind of primary to mid-secondary consumers in your food chain and food web, and so they're a vital part of the ecosystem. But once a year, herring will migrate, and they will migrate to the same spot in the millions. For particular populations around North America, they will migrate to Alaska, and what they do is the females will actually go and lay eggs along weed beds, seagrasses and weed beds in shallow waters, and the males will then go over these weed beds and he will fertilize them. And so you can see in this image here, this is a seagrass or a weed bed there being filled with just eggs, and what happens is the female releases the eggs onto the seagrass, and the male goes over it and releases sperm over that egg to fertilize it, right? This happens en masse. All that white stuff you see around the islands there, that's not sand, that is sperm, right? And eggs combining together. And you can see there, it basically covers the entire waters. You wouldn't want to go swimming in that during this reproductive time, yeah? Once again, synchronized fertilization en masse to make use of that. And actually, herring aren't the only animals that will make use of that. Other animals, well, other predatory birds and fish and things like that will come along, or even just scavengers will come along, because these eggs are still packets of nutrition. They will feed on that, and it feeds into the ecosystem through this mass reproductive events. Okay, so a very important part of maintaining the ecosystem there. Right. Now, internal fertilization. So when it happens on the inside of an organism, usually the female, the chance of fertilization is higher because the internal environment is more controlled. Yeah, you get a greater say as to where it's going, the sperm that is, and also how it's going to get to the egg. Right? It usually requires copulation, which is basically the more official word for sexual intercourse or sex. And organisms that deploy this method usually go for quality over quantity rather than releasing them en masse. They want to release a few, and they want to ensure that that few sperm or that, however much gets into the female and reproduces and fertilizes the egg. Okay, and usually occurs in terrestrial and some aquatic environments as well. Okay, so octopus will do this. Octopus, the male actually has this shortened arm, which he conveniently uses to insert his sperm inside the mantle, which is that kind of hood of the female, right where her ovaries are, and then he will give her his little gift, okay, of sperm. You can see there that that's that little short arm of the octopus. It's shorter, remarkably shorter than the rest of his arms, and that's specially used to deliver sperm to the female, okay. But there are as well, other animals. Most organisms, though, happen to use a penis-like structure that go into the vagina, okay. Deer, you can see the penis of the deer there will mate, internally, and males will use a penis. All mammals pretty much have a penis or a phallus, which is a penis with a bone, in order to reproduce. In birds, however, both males and females have what we call a cloaca. So there are a few exceptions to this rule. Yeah. So a cloaca is basically like a vagina, right? And males will have one too, and so the male just mounts, and then it will still be internal, but he kind of just matches the two holes together. Pretty fascinating. Snails are a bit individual as well, so they have what we call a love dart. Now, the name sounds probably a lot better than what it actually is. The process is called traumatic insemination. Yeah? Traumatic insemination means that the male literally basically punctures the female's body in order to deliver his sperm into her reproductive tract. Yeah, it's traumatic because he basically is killing her in the process, but she lives long enough to reproduce, and then she'll die afterwards, or her reproductive system gets basically destroyed so that she can't reproduce with other snails. Snails also do this other really cool thing as well. They are hermaphrodites. The majority of species are hermaphrodites, but they do this thing where males will actually fight out for the females, the right to mate with the female by biting off each other's penises or love darts. Isn't that exciting? Insects have really complex mating structures and behaviors. You can sort of tell, the majority of insects have some sort of behavior or pattern associated with their mating ritual. One of them is the mantis, the praying mantis. In the praying mantis, fertilization happens on the inside, and the male will actually reproduce with the female. Males generally are smaller than females, but because they're smaller, females can easily kill males that are reproducing with them. And so what the male actually does is he creates what we call a nuptial gift. So he doesn't create it, he becomes the nuptial gift, whereby during the mating process he actually allows the female to eat him and eat his head while he releases sperm into her. And he's got a little kind of like a nerve bundle in his ass that allows him to keep pumping sperm into the female even after she's bitten off his head. So he's basically still having sex after his head's been bitten off. Isn't that fascinating, guys? Now, in addition, offspring development can also be either inside the egg, inside or outside. So once fertilization happens, it can develop inside an egg. Or it can happen outside, which is live young. Mammals generally will develop kind of inside, except we don't have an egg. We kind of have an amnion, which is like a yolk sac, which is kind of like what the uterus lining is. And so that's kind of the embryo there, and then you've got your egg yolk inside this kind of shell, which is an amnion or a shell membrane of some sort, right? You can also produce live young. For example, sharks will produce live young, even though they are fish. They don't develop eggs, or they develop some of them develop eggs, and then the eggs will hatch inside the females, and they produce live young there. Yeah, so that's just another kind of side thing that's pretty fascinating, right? Now, I want to talk about the last section, which is hermaphroditism. So what happens when you have an organism that is both males and females, reproductive organs? In humans, we call that intersex, but in general, we call them hermaphrodites. Now, this is marked by the presence of an XX or an XY sex chromosome. For example, XXY means it's both male and female. And hermaphrodite sort of has a role because it makes mate searching easier. By being both genders, you don't have to look for only one, and you double your chance of finding a partner in general. Okay. You can also self-fertilize, which is not really preferable since there's a lot of complications that happens around self-fertilization. And we can break hermaphrodites into two categories. Simultaneous means at the same time. Hermaphrodites means that they are both sexes at the same time. Worms are simultaneous hermaphrodites. Yeah, a worm will have this kind of squarish component halfway through its body, and that is actually the female reproductive organ. And then the male reproductive organ sort of happens at the end. And when a worm finds another worm, it will kind of latch on the male component to the female component, and likewise, and they will exchange sperm with one another and form an egg of some sort, or a capsule of eggs for developing new worms. Okay. Hermaphrodites can also be sequential, which means they start off as one sex, but throughout their lifetime, they change into another sex. Fish are notorious for that. A lot of fish will change sex throughout their lifetime, and clownfish are one of those really well-known ones. In clownfish, juveniles are actually male. They start off as male, they're smaller, and as they grow older, they will become female. And the reason for that is because females, being larger, are able to carry more eggs. Males, being younger, at the kind of the dawn of sexual maturity, are more fit. And so it kind of benefits both of them to have a staggered timing between sexes, right? And so large females are generally, large clownfish are generally mothers, whereas smaller ones are generally males. Okay. Now, if you ever watch Nemo, you really by the time you learn about this kind of stuff, you realize how wrong some of these Disney movies are, because Marlin should actually be a girl, yeah, which is Nemo's dad, right? Not a boy. Right, he'd be a lot younger in that case, right? Anyway, so that's that. That kind of concludes chapter 11. I hope you guys enjoyed that, and I'll catch you guys later.